welcome to another episode of ASAP, your Afrikan Social Activism Playbook. I am one of your hosts, T, joined as always by my intelligent and this wonderful co-host, Michelee. What's going on, sis?
I feel so special. I'm doing pretty good. I'm doing very well now. We like compliments. We like compliments. No, but yeah, I'm feeling
Yeah,
good.
I,
Got out, got some fresh air today, and trying to keep up. I'm trying to drink more
mm,
water. Like I drink. I think I drink a pretty good amount of water. I drink what's required of me, but I need to. I'm trying to increase. I'm on this intermittent fasting and everything. I'm trying to get my mind right, trying to get,
yeah,
yeah, so I'm good.
yeah.
How
That's
about you? How you
necessary.
feeling?
I was feeling kind of sluggish this morning. Honestly, I got up late. I was up late last night. I don't know what was going on, but I'm good. I'm
Yeah,
here. I'm aware. I'm alive. So that's always good.
right.
Being Black in America every day that you're
Okay,
alive. Try to stay
right.
that way. Like, it's funny. It's funny to me because like Ahmaud Arbery is on my brain this morning because I don't know if you heard, but the people who killed him are trying to post bond.
Oh no.
They requested bond because they got denied in that original arraignment back in June. But they requested bond and it came across my feed yesterday and it annoyed me. Even
Okay.
just the gall to request it, right? That right there just did something to me and it made me sick. That's why at the bottom of our ticker, I have Justice for Breonna Taylor. I have it on here twice. So you're going to see
Mm-hmm.
it at the beginning and you're going to see it at the
And
end of the
the
ticker. And then just in case people don't pay attention to the bottom of the screen, um, I'll put it on the main part of the screen just so,
mm-hmm.
nobody can miss it. Justice for Breonna Taylor. We demand it and we won't stop saying it until it actually happens. And that
Right.
is, setting your agenda and sticking to it. And like I alluded to before, just because these people have been arrested doesn't mean that, first of all, coronavirus has halted all court cases. So
Mm.
who knows when the trial will even begin, right? So we're not out of the water of the Ahmaud Arbery thing. We're not out of the
Right.
water of the George Floyd situation, right? Elijah McClain, all of these things, so many names, I can't even remember all of them. And, it's just so much going on. But the fact that those people are comfortable to even say, we want to post bond, saying that,
Mm.
they're not a threat to anybody else and they're not a flight risk. How can you prove they're not a threat to anybody else when they clearly, like, literally hunted this
You
man down,
murdered, right? You
fabricated
murdered somebody. What do you mean? That didn't do anything
fabricated
to
an
you.
entire
How
story?
are you not a threat?
I mean, the entire story about there were burglaries in the vicinity, like even that all was a lie. Not even that he fit the description. The fact that there were
Right.
burglaries, period, in the area was fabricated. So them not, how are you going to prove to me that they're not a risk to anybody else? Get out of my face with that. And so, that just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. It had anything to do with, I got to take a walk, today and get better and
Okay.
definitely,
Right.
drink some water and just get back to exercising and clearing my head. But
For
yeah,
sure. Get your energy
that's where I
right.
am.
We got work to do.
That's where I am today. I just had to bring that to people's attention because it came across my feed. And even though, it's not our specific topic today, it was necessary to say at the top of the show. And, you know, it's just a part of my mental check-in, and just to bring that to people's attention that, you know, that's what white privilege does. It makes you believe that you can get things. And the fact that it's even being considered is just proof that privilege exists. And depending on, you know, where they are, I know where Brunswick, Georgia is. And I know that once you step outside of 285 in Georgia, you're in a whole nother world than, you know, the comforts of Atlanta. So, you know, we get it twisted sometimes. So anyway, like we told you guys yesterday, today is like yesterday's conversation, cultural appropriation and no chaser being a two-parter. So it's so much to that conversation that we couldn't possibly have covered everything that we wanted to go over yesterday, but it's just an important conversation. I want you to reiterate what actual cultural appropriation is from your standpoint, and do the same, and then we'll go into like our discussion of it.
Right. Well, cultural appropriation, you know, I guess from my point of view, or what I believe it is when someone takes, you know, different characteristics, different things from one culture, like people of another culture. You take something from someone else's culture, and you know, sometimes people profit off of it. They use it, abuse it, you know, whatever, or take it as their own, you know, without giving credit to the people. It's not appreciation. It's you're using it. You're not giving them credit for it. A lot of times the people who are being culturally appropriated, or, you know, who's the culture that's being appropriated, they're not, oftentimes, you know, what we see, they're being ridiculed for some of the same things that other people are being celebrated for, you know, who are taking it or participating in it. So what about you? What do you think?
So, you know, for me, cultural appropriation is, like you said, people take from another culture. And specifically what the first time I heard about it was specifically when one culture or one group of people is doing something or is presented in a certain way, and the way that they naturally do things is even perceived as negatively, or they get condemned for doing a certain thing. And then when somebody else does it, not only do they not get condemned for it, they profit off of it, and they end up taking credit for starting this thing. Like an example, how long have cornrows and afros and certain hairstyles been a thing? How long have, you know, thick body types in African women been just naturally a thing? Lips. We were criticized and ridiculed over our lips, criticized and ridiculed over, you know, Black women's butts and hips and curves. But now that certain white people have approved of this aesthetic, and now, you know, performing, what do you want to call it? Performance enhancements to their bodies, right? To look like that, to gain that aesthetic. They're making money off of it. They're profiting off of it. And even with hairstyles, like people tried to say that one of the Jenners or Kardashians, I don't know their names, was being credited for cornrows being popular. You remember
boxer
that?
braids.
It was in a magazine.
Boxer braids.
Okay. Yeah. And so I'm like, and everybody was like, what? So not only is it that they profit off of it, but they get credit for initiating it. And it's just, and when we were doing it, it was ridiculed. It wasn't professional. We couldn't wear it to work. We couldn't do certain things. I remember when I first started growing my locks, I took my locks out when I because I grew my locks when I was in freshman year of college. I first twisted my hair, and then when I ran out of money that after that first semester, I came back home and was like, okay, now I have to apply for jobs. So I sat in the shower, and my hair had been twisted for like 3 months. I sat in the shower for like 3 hours, untwisting my hair to put it back in an afro, because I didn't believe that I could get a job with my locks at the time. And this is like early 2007. This is before everybody was having them in the professional realm. Like people had them. A lot of people had them, but they weren't working for other people. Like I didn't see them in the professional arena. So when I felt like I had to go get a job, I felt like I can get a job with an afro, right? I felt like I can get a job with maybe cornrows, but I didn't think like with my complexion and having facial hair with locks, I thought it was going to be overload for people. It was just even that mentality for me. I have to always be aware of how I look and what my appearance is, and am I too much of a threat for people? And when other people take on those things and take credit for it, or they profit off of our aesthetic along with other things, you know what I mean? Those are examples of cultural appropriation from, my standpoint. So when it came to be a discussion that Africans in the diaspora were being charged by continental Africans with cultural appropriation of a culture that, first of all, I would argue that we never lost, right? We didn't lose aspects of our culture. And that's one of the things that I always harp on, because you don't lose culture because you always are doing it. Culture comes out in your activities, right? So a lot of the ways that we cook as Africans in the diaspora can be traced back and mirror Africa to this day. The way that we worship, no matter what your religion is, can be traced and linked back to Africa. The way that we dance, the way that we move, the way that we just, interact with one another can be traced and linked back to Africa. I would argue that instead of saying that we lost our culture, we lost access to the significance of the things that we do, and we allowed other people to control the narrative and be able to define what we do for us. So with us, and I believe that what we're doing in the Wakandanization of Africa, or the Black is Kings or things like that, is trying to put the framework of where origins are of the things that we already do. And we talked about we did a little bit about Soulja Boy and his influence, and I really want to highlight Soulja Boy and his influence on that dance culture. Now, it was already started by like the D4Ls and the snap music era, right? When you saw people and like groups of men dancing together, doing the same moves, mirroring one another, hyping each other up. And, of course, it can be traced back all the way to like break dancing and pop locking and those things. But it was a resurgence because it had died down from like the early 90s to the, Goody Mob coming out with They Don't Dance No More. People stopped dancing. People stopped making music to dance too. So it was that era, that late 2005 all the way to Soulja Boy era, that brought it back, where we started dancing in groups again, of course, as well as that Bay Area clowning and crumping of dancing in groups and hyping each other and painting faces, which eerily mirrors African themes and like rituals. And so,
and call and response. You have all these call and response type, in the song. So yeah, that's definitely with Lil Jon. We got Lil Jon and whoever, all these other.
Lil Jon, I would argue, didn't even make hip hop music, right? All he did was make call and response music. Everything was repeat after me. You know what I
Right.
mean? I'm gonna say something, you're gonna say it back, and that's the entire song. And we
Right.
would be in it for a full
Right.
7 to 10 minutes of just
Right.
repeating after Lil. The audience did as much work as Lil Jon at the concert. Right?
Sweating, boy. I'm telling you, we'll be sweating leaving that club.
We were just as involved in the making of that song as the artists were.
I got my boy Lyle over here and giving us some lyrics over here from the windows to the wall.
Exactly. And everything was like, they say it, we repeat it. And so, just being charged with cultural appropriation from some continental Africans, I believe that, we need to know more about one another. And that's why, we started the African Diaspora Dialogue, to create a dialogue so that we aren't talking at each other across, the streams and from our personal perspectives. And we addressed yesterday, like, the idea of certain African immigrants, they have a perspective of being ridiculed coming over here, right? And so they take that personally, right? And they may not have been exposed to the long history of, like, the Martin Delaney's, or they may not have been exposed to communities in Atlanta like the West End, or that influence of the Black Panther Party for self-defense and organizations like us embracing that African aesthetic and those influence from times before, and keeping that going, where they take that negative, and we always do this, right? And they may have been exposed to it, but we do this, right? In the comment section, you can have 1,000 wonderful positive comments, and your eye is going to catch the 1 or 2 negative ones. And what you will mistakenly do is say, man, I can't deal with the comment section. I can't deal with people on Twitter. But is it really a majority of people who are being, who are ridiculed? Or in our humanity, it's our defense mechanism, our survival trait, to focus on those negative aspects. Like, when we were out before, we were civilized and things like that, when we're out in the wild, if you pay attention only to the ground that is flat, and don't pay attention to the dip that's in the ground, 90% of your path could be, grassy and flat and wonderful, but you hit one dip and it trips you and you fall and hit your face. That one dip can end your life. So it's a survival instinct that dates back to our basic survival when we were actually in danger. So we still,
very good point.
Inhabit that. We still take those negative things that our body and our chemical makeup will take that negative comment and still feel that it is a threat to our actual lives.
Right.
That's an instinctual thing that helped us survive, right? So we take that into the modern world, where it's not life-threatening, but our instincts still feel that it is. Our instincts can't differentiate between what's actually life-threatening and what is just, a negative comment or a negative mentality, things that can't actually do harm to you. But just like when we feel fear and stress and pressure, when you feel anxiety, what your body is saying that we're in danger and we have to do something about it. Most of the times it's just, you're kind of stressed at your job. Nothing in that environment is actually going to, kill you, right? But that is our internal survival mechanism. So we have to be able to, as humans, be conscious of, okay, let me check this natural instinct with my conscious, because in my subconscious, it's working on instincts and just survival. But as humans, we have the ability to go beyond survival and actually live. Right. But, a lot of the times we don't know the difference, and we can't even, think of it on that level. So my point being that when we see the negativity, we take it to an extreme where we feel like it is actually life threatening. So it's to the point where the people who have faced ridicule from African Americans, now that they see other African Americans are seeing that it's popular now, instead of saying, finally, you got it, they are upset based on their past experiences, feeling like, oh, so now and it's
back
like what I was saying.
then you ain't want me. Now I'm hot, you
Exactly,
all
Mike
on
Jones,
me.
right? Yeah. So
Right.
but it relates to that thing I was talking about previously in a previous episode when I was saying, are you happy when somebody gets the information, whether it comes from you or not? Right? So if I've been telling my child to do this one thing, like, you need to study so that you can, do better in school, and don't just do your homework and read beyond what they assign you. And they don't listen to it when I say it, right? But somebody comes along and says the same thing and they do it. Now, as a parent, am I going to be angry that my child is doing what I wanted them to do, but it came from somebody else?
Right.
Am I going to be angry, or am I going to just happy that they got it at all, no matter what source it came from? And understanding that I may plant the seed, but somebody else might water it, right?
Boy,
I may plant the seed, but it may be one of those things where, every flower doesn't blossom in the same time period. There are people who plant flowers that they know only blossoms every 100 years. So they know that the seed that they plant, they'll never see blossom. Like, they plant it still. They'll never see it actually blossom and take root. But they still plant that seed.
Yeah, and I think the thing with us, like when it comes to us, especially people who we've been ripped, had our whole like entire heritage, like the culture, the language, everything ripped from us, right? And we didn't have a choice in that. And it's a whole thing to even like want to, you have to be exposed most of the, like, we wouldn't know if we weren't exposed to the ideas, or like being questioned of where we came from, what do we do before now. And so it's like a whole process that we have to go through to even be interested in trying to reconnect, trying to learn,
Right.
and so everybody won't, and a lot of times these experiences, like you said, the experiences that a lot of our immigrant friends, went through, and it was school years, you know what I mean, those elementary years, and
Formative years.
high schoolers. Yes, but you're also realizing that you're dealing with children. And so even as
Right.
like as children, for us in the diaspora, most of the time, especially what we can speak from the American perspective, the North American perspective, is that we're not even educated. We are not educated on our culture. And I'm not going to put that all on the school system. Yes, it should be taught because we are there, we are part of that world, but ultimately it is up to us. That is something that our families need to do. We need to be instilling this information like in our children at home before they get sent off, because how I think about it, why would we be expecting our oppressors to educate us positive, to teach us about ourselves? They're the ones who took it from us. Why would we even be expecting them to educate us properly, to take care of us, to give us what we need? So it's like a whole, so we're going through a lot of like generations not being educated. We don't know what to even teach. We don't know what to teach our children a lot of times. And so like for me, and I know for you, we are like those first generations a lot of times going to different African countries, or going anywhere outside of the world, even moving outside of our hometown. Right. You know what I mean? And we have to bring that information to our people to be able to teach. So like I'm like I end up being like the teacher, and I'm like the youngest one, you know, or one of the youngest ones in the family. And we have to realize like somebody has to carry that burden. We have to take on that responsibility and not hoard it, you know. And at the same time, we have to not be sensitive, not be so sensitive, you know, to be criticized by other people, because like you said, you know, talking about our friends who went through that immigrant experience, because I have a lot of friends now that are moving about the world, you know. I'm an expat, you know, I have a lot of expat friends, and they've lived in, you know, and been associated with different people. A lot of them have, it's not only Black people who they run into, you know, criticizing them for their language, for their accent and food, and, you know, and stuff like that in their school or growing up, but it stands out because we are the ones now trying to reconnect, and we don't know where to start. And so we can get defensive, like, well, you know, and I can understand from their point of view. Sometimes I feel the energy that I get, sometimes it's like, this is mine, you know. Like now as adults, when these conversations of like Black people appropriated African culture, it feels like this is mine, you can't have this, you can't touch it. Reminds me, like, you know, being a kindergarten teacher, and I'm seeing my students, and it's like, even when it's time, like, okay, so and so get to play with the blocks now, and then now they're gonna tear down everything. It's like, why you ain't just let them play with that? It was already built, you know what I mean? And it's like but it seems like really, you know, sometimes it's like really trivial things sometimes, and that we can't really even get past that. And then having that reaction from somebody like, you can't have this is mine, and them not understanding sometimes, like, this is also ours. You know, I know we grew up here. I know, you know, we don't, because I think it's like they're also not educated. I know from my experience of you know, I mean, living in different African countries and traveling different African countries, and I'm purposely asking people, were they educated on the African American experience, or, you know, like the Africans in the diaspora? And a lot of times they don't know. They have not been educated, and it's like, for what? You know what I mean? Really, when you think about who's formulating the, you know, the curriculum and everything, why would they?
Exactly.
You know, because that could spark a revolution, you know, if people were aware from a young age. So why would we be expecting our oppressors to educate us properly? So we do have to be mindful of that and realize, like, we have to be patient with each other to learn. It should be an exchange, and not like we should be able to drop that petty, you know, this is mine, or you can't have it, or, you know, we just have to get past it.
And, you know, it's also a dialogue about, of course, they don't know and don't have much access to us and our history, and we don't have much access about Africa. And not only pre-colonial, we don't have knowledge about colonial Africa. We don't have knowledge about post-colonial Africa. We don't know anything.
That's a whole different thing. Yeah.
Right. And guess what? We also don't have, as Africans in the diaspora, we don't have access to our own history. We don't know enough about what has happened to us as Black Americans, as, you know, Haitians, as Jamaicans. We don't know the history. And so it's definitely important for us to be able to learn how to create a dialogue. And I want to reiterate, one of the reasons that this platform exists, one of the reasons that African Unity Initiative now has a YouTube channel, period, with our myriad of shows that we do, is to not only give out the information, but to also model how to converse, right? Because everybody that I have on these shows aren't, you know, symbiotic in our thinking. We're not monolithic in our perspectives or even our experiences. And so we come from different places and we may have different points, but even when we disagree, you will see our disagreements happen civilly. You will see us actually listen to one another, consider the other person's point, digest it, and then, you know, formulate a response, and not be so ready to respond as soon as the other person starts talking, so much so that you turn your listening ears off. You heard the person, like you audibly heard them say words, but you haven't listened. So
you
this
know
is
what?
a
You know what, bro?
Go ahead.
Yeah. You know, like it's something also that I've been, sometimes when we have these conversations, on our social media, or, in person, whatever. And a lot of times, even when we're talking about like these types of topics, and we'll just end off on, well, we'll just agree to disagree. And it's like everything, I think sometimes people come to, will see these things as like just so confrontational, like just so problematic that we can't actually get to the bottom of it. And it's like we're having these conversations to come up with a solution to move forward, right? We need progress. We are not so in some of these conversations is not just to agree to disagree. Like sometimes there is concrete information, right? That we can, like, we need to acknowledge. We need to acknowledge certain things, and we can have like, we have certain information out there, for people to digest. All of us will not actively seek this information. So when, people like you and I, and, a lot of our peers, we will have these conversations, and like highlight these things. And we want to bring it to our people, to our families, to our friends, and like-minded people who, we know that we're trying to work towards solutions to help our people. And so it's like, everything can't be seen as just like we're just at each other's throats. Conversations, like, dialogues can get heated sometimes, a lot of passion and stuff comes up, but we cannot just leave off on, well, we just don't agree, we just don't get along, like we're working towards a better relationship, you know what I mean, a better understanding
and better communication, period. Like I said, I know how people communicate over social media. I completely, I've been involved in a conversation. Was like, okay, what am I doing here? Like, okay, how do I okay, maybe I just need to remove myself and also, like I said, there's only so much you can do on Twitter, right? There's only so many characters. So maybe this isn't the platform for me to have dialogue. Maybe let's start the dialogue somewhere else, and maybe it can continue on Twitter, and maybe we can reference people to the starting point, and then we can have that type of discussion. Like I would like to have, once we grow to a certain point, be able to continue these types of conversations. Like every day after ASAP, we have people continue the conversation on Twitter in a healthy way, right? Because they are things off of what we're doing. Like right now, the way that we converse with one another, I hope that in our YouTube comments, we curate our audience to a point that they create a healthy dialogue in the comment section and not one of those toxic ones. Because I believe much of the onus on that toxicity comes from the content creators themselves, where we have to be responsible for how we present the information and how we're talking to, or most of the time talking at, our audience. And I try to present things where it's never me talking at anybody, which is why I try to create so much of a communal feel and a dialogue where there are multiple perspectives. And like I said before, there will be guests on the show to even have that much more of a variety of thought into these discussions. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's just very important that when we're talking about these things, we are nuanced in our thought. And, a lot of people lack nuance. Is being able to subtly differentiate the different shades. And it's really a word that derives from art, because it's really talking about subtlety in the shades of like a picture or a piece of work or a play or whatever. And when you're talking about nuanced conversations, it's not hard agree, hard disagree. I may have elements of what you say that I agree with and elements that I may have to think about. And then even still, it's not a hard disagree. It's a let me consider this. digest it, right? Because I believe what we're used to doing is regurgitating information. And regurgitation is not a thing that you should do. Like when you eat, you're supposed to eat, digest it, and then you get the nutrients from what you eat. But if you eat and you regurgitate it, you know what I mean? You're not getting those nutrients. You're doing the physical thing of eating, right? So the same thing as hearing and listening. I heard you audibly say something to me, but I just got enough of it. I stayed quiet until it was my turn to talk. That's the same thing as, like, you know, conversational bulimia. You're not getting the nutrients of the conversation, right?
Yeah, right. Boy, this feel like relationship advice right here, though, because we do this in our daily, exchanges of we exchanging words, but are we really listening? Conversation, communication is
we're talking about relationships.
That. Yes, exactly.
When we talk about building, we're talking about unity across the African diaspora, and I think we put limitations on relationships, thinking that it's only romantic. Relationship just means any relation that you have with another person. Like you are in a relationship with your siblings, you're in a relationship with your parents, you're in relationship with anybody that's close in your inner circle.
True.
And putting limitations on relationship to only mean romantic is a part of why we don't know how to communicate, period. Is why we don't advance and get anywhere. Like in business, you're in a relationship with your business partners. And if you don't have a relationship, if you're not communicating, that partnership is going to fail. When we're talking about African unity and we're talking about actually building the bridge of that global African perspective, if we don't relate to one another, and in order to relate, I have to be able to listen to you. I have to have an understanding of you and your perspective, right? I can't dismiss your perspective, because as an African American, I could easily get on here and be all the way defensive on, continental Africans saying that we are culture appropriating, right? But I do diligence to validate their feelings, right? I am bringing validity in saying that I have witnessed how and what they're referencing and why they may feel this way. At the same time, presenting information about, the subtle inaccuracies in their usage of the term cultural appropriation. So it's not me demonizing them. I am having a conversation and saying, I receive and understand your feelings and have validated them, right?
Yes.
Which brings them into the conversation comfortably. And they're like, okay, at least they acknowledge that what I'm feeling is valid. And that's why, as Black people, period, when we have race conversations, a lot of the times we can't move on to the solution because people haven't even acknowledged that our gripe is even valid. Right. So when we're talking to the opposition, they will tell us that, what you're talking about isn't real. Like systematic racism doesn't exist. So you're trying to prove to people that it does exist, so much so that you get so caught up on proving that they've presented a straw man argument that have taken you off course from the solution, because you're trying to validate the argument in the first place. So I am off the table. I am not saying that continental Africans have an invalid argument or have no right to feel the way that they feel. I'm just giving them the information about, first of all, a lot of these things happen in childhood, in their formative years. So I understand how it sticks to them, but also understanding that the people who ridicule came from were also children growing and they had a lack of knowledge, right? So understanding that nuance as well, on hoping that, they can accept that reality and say, you know what, we all had to mature, right?
And that's the burden. We all have to carry an extra
people to where they were counted.
Right. we all have to like take responsibility, you know, and just like understanding. Sometimes it might be frustrating because I know like when we're trying to resolve any type of conflict or whatever, everybody feels feels a certain way about something, you know, and we have to realize, you know, like you said, recognize and you know, the validity of their feelings and their experience, you know, because we have different experiences. Some people were picked on. So it's not going to be so easy to be like, well, just get over it or let's just move on. You have to
Right.
acknowledge people's experiences, you know, and their feelings. And I mean, I think when it comes to us, we have to be more sensitive and understanding, you know, and vulnerable. Cause I think when we talk about a lot of things like, something that, you know, that I bring up quite often, you know, especially in adulthood, in these recent years that I'm realizing we have a lot of different issues. So like the conversation between men and women, in particular, Black men and women in particular. And a lot of times the communication is just so horrible that it just feels like, oh, well, you're just blaming me for everything, or, you know, well, you do this and this, you know, and we have to realize like in communication, we can't just um, be so bad at communication, but expect someone to have, you know, understood the hardships, you know, like to understand your pain, but you're not even good at communicating your pain. You know, like when we talk
Right.
about it was something I was just talking about, like toxic masculinity. And one of the features of toxic masculinity is men not being able to or to express their feelings, to express their emotions, because you might be seen as weak, right? So if you know that you're not expressing your emotions, how should I know how you feel, how you honestly feel? So it's like, it's something like as simple as that. So we have to, when it comes bringing it back to us with you know, Africans in the diaspora and continental Africans, we have to understand like we can communicate better and just say, well, I didn't know, or you know what I mean, or understand that, okay, well, he or she wasn't educated on our history here. You
Right.
know, they don't know much about this. And so if it is something offensive, because when I saw the conversations, the first articles, you know, accusations of a cultural appropriation, you know, as far as African Americans appropriating African culture, it was like, well, you don't even know what those dots on your face mean. And so, you know, you're just ignorant. And it's like, well, teach. If they don't know, you could just be like, you know, if that was something that you only wear at a funeral, you only wear at a wedding, teach
Right.
them
Right.
then. Because it's not like they were doing it in an offensive way. It wasn't like we up there clowning around. It's like it was a celebration of Blackness and reconnecting to your roots. And so when it's something like that, like we just have to understand, like, okay, sometimes it might be annoying to you, but kind of like bite your tongue and be like, okay, well, let me at least observe it. But let's try to not, you know, just kind of just criticize too much without that understanding. Because like you said, a lot of times we were
Yeah.
children and we lack that understanding. We lack the knowledge.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
it's going to be a learning process. It's a whole learning process.
And I just want to end by saying, like, actual cultural appropriation, you know, we talked about it, but think about, you know, Sarah, right? The Venus Hottentot, who was, you know, ridiculed and marveled. It's a South African woman who was marveled at by European people and put on display in Europe because of her, you know, features, because of her, you know, big butt and wide hips and all of these things. And people marveled at her and was just, they put this woman on display and she, you know, died in captivity as a damn living museum feature, right? And now you fast forward today from that actual historical event to people being paid for, like people who descended from the people who ridiculed her and put her on display. Those descendants are now being rewarded and, you know, credited for having those features, and now they make
Right.
money off of it. So
Right.
that's actual cultural appropriation, right? Not what we're doing. So I just want to make sure that we make that clear, and to, you know, re-emphasize this just like we did yesterday, we are going to, in our highlight reel, show just how long and how deep this history goes of Africans in the diaspora embracing Africa, and that it's not this new phenomenon. It's been here, right? And so a lot of credit goes to Marcus Garvey for invigorating Africans in the diaspora to look to Africa again, right? Yesterday, we showed that it was happening prior to Garvey. Garvey is actually credited with Africa for Africans, you know, and we learned yesterday that Martin Delany actually may have been the original person to coin that term, and we know that his time period was the 1820s to the 1880s. Right. We're talking about a full century before Garvey got on the scene. I just want to make sure that it's clear the time delineation. Again, you know, we learn Black history as a flat surface, and we don't always give credit to just how much time we've been in this fight, how much time has passed, how long we've been in the struggle, and that we have been constantly fighting for and advocating for our people, our aesthetic, our history, our just presence, our aura. And, you know, we've been enthralled in what we love about us. Now, of course, there are elements of the opposite, right? We're in a society that is demonizing that very existence. But to show you that there's always been resistance to even that on the continent as well as in the diaspora. So Marcus Garvey, a Jamaican-born man, looked around and was in history trying to find out why in his education did he learn about all of these great kingdoms and empires that took place in Europe, and questioned, where is the Black empire? Where is our kingdom? Where is our place? And took it upon himself to do the research and became an apprentice to a publisher, and, you know, learned how to write and do of newspapers, and did the work to actually educate himself in a way that could not only give him the information that he was looking for, but how do I disseminate that information to other people? Like at the time, we're talking about, you know, when newspapers were the primary source of how people got news. So just think about that. We talk about champions, right? Somebody who didn't just look for the information for themselves, but said, I want to learn the trade of copy and newspaper, and I will put myself as an apprentice to learn how to create the source, the primary source that people get their information from. Right. So that once I gain the knowledge that I'm searching for, I can also disseminate it to the other people around me that need it as well. That is forethought. That right there is dope. You know what I mean? What are your thoughts?
On Garvey, oh man, he's one of my favorite people in history. I got a Black Star Line shirt that I got. Actually, it was a clothing line I found in South Africa, but they had a bunch of, you know, Black Star Line. I thought that was so dope. But yeah, he's one of my favorite people because he was a doer. Like, he didn't just sit back and speculate, or, you know, he was a type of person. He created organizations, he created different business ventures, you know, to like for the progress. You know, he was just like, yo, we can do this, you know, like, I'm going to do this. And he put his money forward, his effort, you know, forward. And he was you know, like I said, he was a doer. He was an action person, and very respected. You know, he was serious. He wore a general uniform. Like, this man was serious. He was serious about his business. And he's a guy that you know, who we love to wave our RBG flags and stuff. This is the man who, you know what I mean? He came up with that. You know, red for the blood, black for the black people, and green for the, you know, the fertile the land in Africa. And he, even though he didn't make it to Africa, you know, he, like, this man built the Black Star Line, you know,
Right.
the ship saying, okay, this is our way, this is our transportation to Africa. You know, he, like, that's how much he was about his business. He said, I'm going to create the transportation for us to go. And he didn't even make it himself, but it just shows like how dedicated he was, you know, to the cause. And I think, you know, a lot of our more modern day leaders, I believe, I'm almost certain that it was like Malcolm X's parents were Garveyites, you know,
Right.
even like, yeah, right. It was, right. Okay. You know, and so he inspired like whole other generations. And like you brought up, Martin Delaney, like we highlighted yesterday, this was almost 100 years after, you know, after all of that was going on, you know, well, about 80 years or so, I think. He was born, like, Marcus Garvey was born 2 years after Martin Delaney died, you know,
Right.
so not 100, not a whole 100, but still, you know, we're talking about like straight during enslavement, and then a whole generation afterwards, you know, of still carrying on that Pan-Africanism.
But, you know, we talked about Shirley Chisholm. Her father was, you know, linked as well. So it shows you influence of just how this thing goes, and how one generation's influence can inspire, like we talked about yesterday. If we look at the ancestral bibliography of our great heroes that we know about, we will see references to other people who influenced them. And just like in a book, if you want more information, you go to the bibliography. If you, okay, I like this book, but they reference these other 10 books, let me go read all 10 of them. Oh, those 10 books had a bibliography too. Let me go read those. And then you just stack information on top of information. And now when you enter these conversations, you have such a strong argument that nobody can shut you down or invalidate you, because you've done your thorough due diligence, right? And we encourage that always. And so back to Garvey and just what he did, and my tie, the way I like to frame this is that Marcus Garvey is more related to the work that he did in the United States, right? The time that I heard about Garvey was things that he did in the US, but he was from Jamaica, did all of his education in Jamaica, didn't come to the United States until his adulthood, and actually came to the United States because he wanted to work with Booker T. Washington. It just so timed out that Booker T. Washington died like a year or two before Garvey could actually meet him, because he was already writing letters to Booker T when he was still in Jamaica, letting him know that he appreciated his efforts and his, you know, methodology, and they had, you know, in principle agreed to work together. But Booker T just happened to pass away prior to Garvey's arrival. But, you know, he had that thought of, I need to get to the Black people in America. He wasn't saying, okay, Black people in Jamaica, we only need to relate back to Africa. And I'm only starting this for Black people in Jamaica. His whole thing, Garvey and the UNIA itself, shows you African unity. It shows you the diaspora, like the realities of what can happen when we come together in the diaspora. It shows you the thought that permeated through the African diaspora of people considering one another as one, as the same people, as a collective body, as not a monolithic one singular thought type body, but still one singular body. Just because you are united doesn't mean that you become an amalgamation and you lose your identity, right? The most healthy types of unions and partnerships are those that I understand your strength, you understand mine, I understand that person's over there, and we make a complete unit, not all trying to do the same thing, right? Understanding everybody's
we
part
have
to
different
play.
strengths.
Like I said, football is my favorite sport. It's the most dependent team sport that has ever been created.
Yeah.
If I'm the best quarterback in the world and I have a wide receiver that has no hands, my quarterback rating is going to be awful. Because I can throw a spiral. It can be as accurate as possible and it hit the person in the hand every single time. If that person doesn't catch it, that reflects my rating, like my personal is dependent on somebody else doing their job, right? So that is the same type of mindset that Garvey had when he came to America and brought the UNIA and that spirit and that idea to it. So it was just exactly that's what we were talking about. This is a relationship. It's true when it comes to marriage. It's true when it comes to any type of relationship. It is what relationship is. When we talk about building unity across an African diaspora, it's the same thing that can be tied to a family unit. It's the same thing in all different levels of relationship where you have to have communication. You have to be able to see everybody's strengths and be able to acknowledge the worth of that, to give value to everybody's part to play, right? And so I just like to view it from that scope, because what we're talking about here is the history of the African diaspora and how long we've been in this embracing of our African ancestry, acknowledging it, like lifting it to a level of appreciation that most definitely needs to happen. So it's very important to look at this. So again, people know Marcus Garvey, but Marcus Garvey, being a Jamaican-born man, coming to the United States, leading the largest collection of movement of Black people still to this day, right? In one singular organization, right? And not only did that influence impact the U.S., and I want to, talk about the Black Star Line. So the Black Star Line, yes, it was a ship line, but it wasn't just to transport people. The Black Star Line was trade ships. Garvey had the forethought and said, I want to create direct trade across the African diaspora and cut out the middleman, leave the European and the colonizers out of our business, where we're not dependent on their docks and their ships and their whatever, so that they're taking a piece off of what we're doing. Let's create trade between these independent African countries, or at the time they weren't independent yet. So he was advocating for, the end of colonization in Africa, as well as in the Caribbean, as well as, the so-called colonization of what we as African Americans experience, being in the belly of the beast and being surrounded by, that white influence, right? That Euro influence. And so African Americans, Africans in the Caribbean, continental Africans doing direct trade with one another. That was the thoughts and vision behind the Black Star Line, to be economically connected to one another with no middleman, with nobody taking pieces and chunks off of what we're doing. Oh, the bananas that's growing in Cuba is going directly to, the people of Sierra Leone. Oh, the mangoes from Guinea are going directly to the port of Savannah, to the Black people right there. So that we are doing direct trade with one another and actually benefiting fully off of our own resources.
And we're not dependent on those who have been locking us out of, out of the system, out of being, independent and being able to provide for ourselves, because that's the only way out, is if we do create those systems ourselves. We do establish the transportation, establish those, you know, those entities that will help us become independent. So we can't, you know, that, I mean, what he did, it was just, it was so important. I think it shows, but he didn't do it on his own. It's not like he came over as a rich man, right? He didn't come over and he was rich. It was a whole effort, you know, by, it was people who believed in the cause, you know, like we talked about, you know, there
Yep.
were many Garveyites, a lot of people who identify as Garveyites, you know, because they believed in that vision, they wanted to do for self. And we still have that, like, you know, there are a lot of us who are willing to pull together resources and stuff, you know, to establish those same things. And I think we have to just, you know, revert back to that, just get this knowledge and then see how it can be done. Because what, how he, I don't like to say that he failed, right? Because he did it, right? He was doing it, but he was infiltrated, you know, you could, they had to,
Right. He
he
didn't
got
he didn't
infiltrated, man. But
the full potential of what it could have been, but he
yeah,
definitely didn't fail. And
right,
so
he
I
didn't
wanted to
fail.
make sure that we highlighted just in this short period of time. So as always with these highlight reels, I encourage everybody listening, those listening to us live, those listening to us, you know, in the aftermath, as you listen to us, you know, once the recording is over and you do the rewatch, Google Marcus Garvey. And don't just read the Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm.
Google his own writings in his own words. Read the
Right.
words of the man. Watch the documentaries about him. Listen to other people who were influenced by him, other people who were Garveyites. And,
Yes.
you know, look at not only the family tree of inspiration from Garvey, but also look at the tree that he sprung from the Martin
Exactly.
Delaney,
Leading up
from
to
the
Garvey.
Denmark Vesey.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And so, you know, we encourage you to just not take our word for it. Just like I always say, we were fortunate enough to be educated in a program that encouraged research, encouraged citing your sources, encouraged, you know, not listening and taking the information from somebody blindly, but also validating it to make sure that, you know, it's true, but also just to interpret it for yourself. How does it hit you when you read the words for yourself? Because it hits
Yeah.
different from when you hear it from somebody else, right? And when you read it for yourself, just like people in church who everybody has access to a Bible, right? But
Right.
you got people who have a Bible everywhere and they only know the verses that the preacher said that Sunday. And that's on you. That's your fault.
Yep.
You can't
Turn
just
the
take
page.
another person's interpretation. Right,
Right.
exactly. You can't depend on another person's interpretation of it. And even, you know, even if you like um Michelee and I's the way that we present information, because we try to present it in a way that isn't so deep, that is relatable, but also it's going to hit different when you read it for yourself, when you see it for yourself, when you do the deep dive for yourself. Because, you know, we're only going to dive so deep in this show because we keep it moving, but we present to you people that you know, people that you don't know, but also the people that you already know, things and elements that you may not have known.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would say a lot of people know Garvey, right? They know the name, but do they know the work?
Yes.
Do they know the actual influence? Do they know the history? Do they know all of these things? And one last thing about Garvey, just his persistence. So Garvey got to the United States like a little bit before World War One, right? So Garvey was already talking about all the things, and Black people need to consider this and do that. And a lot of Black people weren't listening to Garvey.
Yeah.
Garvey's movement blew up and really became the at the height when Black soldiers came home from World War One, so-called fighting for liberties, you know, across seas, thinking that, you know, if we're fighting for freedom, we're fighting on behalf of America. When we get home, surely we'll benefit from the GI Bill and the freedoms that we fought for over there. You know, maybe America is coming around. They seem like they're really spouting all of this justice and freedom for all. So we're fighting in the military on behalf of that ideal, right? Come home and find out that they're not a part of the GI Bill. They're not getting the housing. They're not getting the access to education. They're not getting anything. They're not even a part of the VA, right?
Right.
And so with that reality, and a lot of them got treated worse after they came back from fighting the war than they had been treated prior to the war. And it was a shock, right? And so they started to, Garvey was already there saying what he was saying the whole time. Then they just started to pay attention to him. It's like, but that dude was right.
Right.
You know?
Well, why does it take that, man? Why does it have to take
understand that? You know,
like
people.
I mean, I get it, but it's like because we even look at the Civil War, right? You had Black people fighting in the Civil War, enslaved, still being mistreated by the people who they are fighting alongside, right? Like they are fighting for their own cause, right? I'm fighting to be free. And these people who they're fighting with, they don't care if they're free. Like they're not, you know, and we still, after that, we experienced how many years of, you know, discrimination and torture and this and that. And we go, you know, 100 years after that, we repeat the cycle over and over and over again. But that's why we got to look back at this information. Like it's there. We got to learn from it.
That's why, you know, it's important to highlight the champions because they did exist and we needed them because, and it's not an elitist statement to say that the talented 10th does exist. And this is not a race thing. If you just look at people in general, most people are just looking to fall in line.
Yeah. Yes.
So
that's
everybody
how it works,
isn't built the same. Because as
everybody
humans,
can be a manager.
Our goal is to be right. Everybody can't be the business owner. You wouldn't have any employees, right? And that's not to demean or devalue the people who are employees and have that mindset. But it's also just to recognize that certain people are, you know, built a certain way. And as human beings, you know, our primary function is to be accepted. We want to be accepted by others. And so a lot of the times we will conform for the sake of being liked. Everybody can't think outside the box and say, you know what? I don't really care if you like me. I know what I have to do and I'm going to get it done. Right. And so that feeds into that element of our humanity, also dating back to our very, very beginning of us actually needing to be with one another. Okay, this is the way that things do. This is how I'm going to be protected. Okay, I need to be a part of this, you know, group as we travel together in this nomadic beginning of humanity. Okay, the real live wolves are coming out to hunt people. So I need to be with the pack. So how do I fit in with the pack? Oh, they're going to kick me out if I, you know, do this thing. So that conformity becomes it was a necessity for our survival, like we talked about earlier with the anxiety thing. So it dates all the way back to the beginning of us as a species where we needed to conform to save our actual life. So now we do it in the context of our present day society where most people will just fit in so that they're not excluded or excommunicated from the group. But then you have those people who can take that ridicule, because Garvey was ridiculed like crazy. But imagine if Garvey from the ridicule prior to World War I, and then the people come back and they're looking for him, but he gave up and quit. Right? When they came back and were ready for his message, he was right there still doing it and rep for them. That there is a champion. Those are the people that we highlight. Those are
And
the
a
people that,
visionary as well.
relish.
Yeah, he was a
Right.
visionary. You have to
Being
be a visionary.
being able to not be shaken that other people can't see what you see.
Mm-hmm. Because they
And still
won't see it.
saying,
That's the thing. They won't see it
right.
most of the time. You have to be brave. Like we talked about yesterday a little bit. You have to be brave. You don't have to. And it's funny because we do practice this. This is something. It's not a new concept. We talk about walking by faith, not by sight. These are things that we grow up and we hear all the time. But we have to also apply it to our to this situation, to all situations in life. That's how we have to approach it.
Yep. And so, that's our and as most our highlight reel as to our Monday morning quarterback. Now, yesterday's Monday morning quarterback, I believe, was the first time that we reviewed a Monday morning that, we kind of had to review a tape of a game that we lost. So we talked about Liberia and the mistakes that we made. We threw a lot of interceptions in that game. We fumbled a lot in that game of the development and the conflicts that existed and persisted in Liberia, right?
Yeah.
So it's also important for us to review the tape of the losses so that we can learn from those mistakes as well. But today we talk about the legacy of the red, black, and green, right? So a lot of people have seen these colors floating around, and the red, black, and green comes from Marcus Garvey. He developed those colors, and in an effort, because he was saying, just like when he questioned, where are our kingdoms, right? Where are our stories, our legends? He also asked, where is our flag? Every other important nation that is respected has a banner, has a flag that represents them as a people, so that when you just see that piece of cloth hanging from a pole, you know where you
who
are,
I'm with.
you know who's being represented. Exactly. So he created the flag, the red, black, and green, the red for the blood, right, of the people, the spirit, the root, the connectivity. The blood doesn't go anywhere, even if you are displaced. The same blood still. The black for the people, for our melanated skin tone, and to be proud of that. The green for the fertility of the land of Africa, of the continent itself, of re-embracing that actual land, and how we carry that with us, as well as a need to go back to it and be a part of it. Also, like Mufasa said, in the circle of life, we become part of that land once we pass away,
when we
and
die.
reintegrate back into it. So what is your so we talk about the legacy of the red, black, and green. That is the significance of it from Garvey's standpoint. But Michelee, what do you know of the legacy and the carrying on of that torch?
Of the RBG. So I mean, I know a lot of us, we do a lot of us, like a lot of people after Marcus Garvey have adopted the RBG. I know, like when we see the Black Power movement, the people picked it back up, and re-embraced it. And you see even other people across seas, like in Africa, in different African nations, they have adopted some of the same ideas, even taken from Marcus Garvey's ideas, from the colors to even like we spoke about briefly, talking about the establishment, we're talking about the independence of Ghana. He used the Black Star in the flag. You know what I mean? So all throughout, even after Garvey, we see influences of this idea of establishing that the colors and the symbols.
Yeah, and like when we talk about, again, time delineation, right? So we talk about Garvey, and we say a little bit before World War I, on into like maybe like the 1930s was like the height of the UNIA, the whole Garvey movement, the Back to Africa movement, and that sentiment being represented all the way until, you know, Garvey was imprisoned and eventually deported. So, and, you know, you mentioned it, Garvey himself, sadly, I remember my heart broke when I heard this news. Garvey, one of the people who is most known for inspiring people to embrace Africa, never actually had an opportunity to visit the continent.
I know.
Never stepped foot in Africa. Like, it's heart-wrenching, right? And so, but the fact that his legacy and the work lived on and was eventually even embraced in Africa. So he created a flag, but that red, black, and green can be found on Kenya's flag. It can be found in Ghana's flag. Even the black star is on Ghana's flag. And in so many other representations, the fact his legacy was eventually embraced in the continent. And it wasn't just looked upon as, oh, look at this little person in the diaspora, you know, trying to be African, right? It wasn't, Garvey wasn't said to be a cultural appropriator of, you know, Africa, right? And so that is what we're talking about when we have this nuanced conversation where it's about reclaiming. And the fact that Jomo Kenyatta, Kwame Nkrumah were able to take influence from somebody in the diaspora to the actual continent just shows you the power of the influence of what can happen when the African diaspora has unity and is at work, how powerful that can be, because that influence from Garvey being reinvigorated, the legacy being picked up again. So we're talking about from the 30s all the way to like the 60s. That's a good 20, 30-year period that the influence had kind of waned and subsided, right? Once Garvey got deported, UNIA was still around. It wasn't as impactful during the civil rights. You didn't hear about Africa as much in civil rights, the civil rights movement. But in the Black Power movement, which succeeded the civil rights movement, and they have some overlap, but a lot of those people were more radical, and they were like, you know what, it's time for us to really pick up and defend ourselves. Maybe we don't want they're trying to integration. We don't want that. We want what's for us, and we want to build for ourselves. And they looked back and was like, that guy had the idea. Let's re-embrace his ideas. They re-embrace the colors. They because like the red, black, and green had subsided. And in the 60s and the 70s, it came back into prominence. So much so that while Kwame Nkrumah and Jomo Kenyatta were being educated, they saw those colors and that aesthetic and that Pan-African mindset being reestablished here in America, that they went back and was like, we want to implement that where we are from. And not only fought for their independence and sparked a movement in other African countries that led to that entire independence ram from 58 all the way into, you know, the 1960s. It was embraced in the aesthetic of those countries, in the representation of those countries, in the ideas of those countries. You got Sekou Touré of Guinea. You have Jomo Kenyatta of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, Kenya, embraced African, Pan-African ideals on the continent, where it's not just an idea of, man, we as Africans in the diaspora long for Africa and are reaching out to them. They are also embracing that mindset and that mentality as well. And you can see that legacy still live on today from Sierra Leone and Ghana, and that year of return that people, the continent embraced welcoming Africans from the diaspora to come and visit, and re-embracing that feeling and the representation of that. So it's the legacy of someone's work that can be permeated. Also, Garvey didn't live to see that happen. A seed was planted that was watered by someone else and blossomed for somebody else to see. But the seed was planted, right? Back to that reference that we talked about before. You always plant seeds for your benefit, for you to see the beauty of that flower bloom. Maybe you planted that seed for great grandchildren to see that flower bloom. Right. And, those are things that we have to continuously consider and be aware of, and the things that we're doing, and in this fight that we're having. I'm building African Unity Initiative. I don't know if I'm going to see the full length of everything, that the vision that was presented to me.
Right.
I don't know if I'm going to see it all happen. I doubt that I will see it all happen, because, if I were to tell people every aspect of African Unity Initiative, they would call me insane. And I know that. But if I'm not insane,
but you gotta be insane. Right. You have to be. Yes, exactly.
If my vision, if your vision doesn't scare you, you're not doing it right.
Exactly.
You should be definitely afraid of your vision.
Right, because this also we got to think about the process, the process of us, really getting, becoming liberated, and working through these things. We have been through like a traumatic experience in more than one. We're still not even recovered from the first one. Even when we talk about, we spoke about like the prison industrial system and stuff like that before, and that's just slavery all over again. We see, the debt system and all kind of we're not done. We're not even through what we've been through, what our ancestors were through. This is still that time when we talk about, well, if I was back in slavery, I would have done this and that. We are still in this time. We have not overcome. And so how would we possibly see the end of it? So the work that we have to do now, and that's why it's so urgent. That's why the name of this show is called ASAP, right? It's the Social Activism Playbook, but ASAP, because these are things that we have to get hip to it now. We have to start implementing these things right now to put it in the works, because I do want a better future for the children that I will have, and hopefully, someday in the future, and not even just my children, but, for all of our children and for generations to come. We have to start doing the work right now. We have to go through therapy. I'm in conversation with a lot of my friends, on these topics, and we agree on different things, like we need therapy. This is trauma. When you read like actual medical research, from psychologists like Dr. Joy DeGruy, there is actual education surrounding this, information surrounding this, and saying how trauma can affect you and be passed on genetically. So this is stuff that we actually have to start implementing now, and it's multi-layered. We need therapy. We need actual programs. We need to join, we need economic development and cooperation. So it's so many layers to it. So no, we won't all see it now. We have to not be selfish to say, well, I won't experience it, so I'm not going to put in the work. We have to be working right now.
That's a very Eurocentric mindset. That's why, you hear about people like the electric car, the successful electric car functioning and built in the mid 90s. But what happened was people were making so much money off of the gasoline industry and the oil industry that they were saying, guess what? We see what's coming down the line with how our, continuous drilling is going to actually impact the atmosphere. We see the science. We know that is right. But guess what? by the time that happens, I'm going to be dead. So I'm going to make the money off of it and let my grandchildren, great grandchildren worry about it then. That's what Europeans, that's what the American people said at that time. So we have to think differently. We have to think in advance for our descendants and be able to say, I'm going to prepare a way for them, make sure that they inherit better than the one that I was born in. And I'm definitely not going to contribute to a, horrific world for them just because I can make a quick little buck off of it. And I know that by the time this negative thing comes down, I'm not going to be here to see it. And the same way with the positive things, I'm not going to plant this seed today because I'll never see it. No.
Right.
Selfish. You need to have that forethought and be exactly. And so
that's the thing. We got to be visionaries. We have to, not be selfish. We have to be selfless. We have to understand that these things, and understand and that's why I like stuff like gardening, because it teaches you patience. It teaches you, you have to nurture, go back, plant the seed. You have to nurture it, for it to actually blossom, to grow, to be fruitful. And our children, and it's not only our children. Sometimes I don't even like to give that example because some people are like, well, I don't have no children. I don't, and so we have to just kind of, I guess, present it in a different way. Cause I'm like, I don't know. It's still important. And I think for us to be so disconnected, just given our history and for us, being raised in America, let's just say, and with that Eurocentric mindset that we see and that we live in, is it is very selfish. It's not, it's not thinking about everybody else. It's certain things they're still using things that's creating a bad situation, for our whole environment. We're talking about global warming. People are literally not even caring if the earth will be, if people will be able to inhabit the earth years after they're gone. People are not even thinking about that. And so we have to do better.
Just like things in my personal life, a lot of the things that we do kind of mirror the way that we think about the world globally. So you hear about the microwave type of thought and needing instant gratification, right? So I don't even like the microwave because it takes the nutrients out of the food. So I would rather take the time to reheat up my food on the stove and not only preserve the nutrients, but I'm also training myself to be patient, like you said, in the practice of gardening, because a lot of the way we think it related to the way we had to do things. When you were a farmer, when we were hunter-gatherers, there was first of all, we had to roast our food if we were eating meat. You know what I mean? We ate maybe the fruit and vegetables raw, but we learned, okay, I'm not going to, first of all, I got to go hunt my food, right? Kill it, gut it, skin it, and then roast it. So by the time I eat, I have waited a long time from the preparation of all that I had to do, right? So I can't even fathom in my mind what impatience is until you get these technological advances that we start to become impatient. I remember dial-up internet, right? And now I'm looking at my Wi-Fi like, why is this moving so slow? And maybe 3 seconds longer for the page to load. Our impatience is growing with our dependence on technology and these tools that we've created to make our lives better.
That's deep. That is deep.
It really goes back to what we do in our daily lives. We create our own impatience. So by training ourselves to go back to do things like gardening, training yourself to go out of your way and warm up your food on the stove, or not, maybe you want to bake an entire meal, and knowing that there's no shortcut to making a cake. You got to bake that thing. You got to put the ingredients in. You gotta twist those things in to make that batter, and you just gotta be patient when you put the thing in the oven. So
that's, you know what it made me think about, like how we spoke about like both of our experiences living on a continent, and in some places where it wasn't the water wasn't running, you got to go to the well, crank that thing up, you got to carry it back, or you ain't getting no water, you ain't taking a bath today.
Right.
So it's like it teaches you. That's why I appreciated that experience so much. It just taught me so much. It taught me patience. It taught me to work, you know what I mean? You have to work for it. And I, like, similar to you, I didn't come back, like before I even moved, like not using a microwave and just learning, about just really paying attention to those things, and not just wanting instant gratification, not just getting the quick and easy stuff. Exactly. Of course, sometimes, because, a lot of times now, just in the society, the world we live in now,
the tools are there for a
we
reason.
don't have
like, we use
much
them.
time. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. It's like there's a convenience, but we should not be so dependent on them. We do have to practice those things, especially as it pertains to us developing the patience to work with each other if we want to work towards a better future, for us. And like you said, most likely we will not see the end of it. We can make our lives the best as we can. We can, do whatever makes us happy, but in this lifetime, but the work that we're putting in now is going to have to be for the future, and we might not see it.
But guess what? Even in the mindset of seeing the end of it needs to change, right? There shouldn't be an end.
Yeah.
If you're a farmer and
exactly.
you plant for that season, right? And you do harvest season. Are you just going to harvest it once and not plant it for the next year? There is no end cycle to tilling your land. That is your business. And you need to continuously plant, and then harvest, and then plant, and then harvest. It continuously happens. It needs to be maintained every year. And that's the way we need to see the advocacy for our people, as not having an end goal, as to be sustainable, as to be continuous. It shouldn't have an end date to it. But that's our Monday morning quarterback and our highlight reel, and just looking at that long legacy, and also just continuously, disproving the point that Africans in the diaspora could possibly culturally appropriate something that is ours, that we have a claim to, and to do it with understanding and present this information not in a defensive manner, but in a manner where we explain not only do we have access to it and that a claim to it, that this is not anything new, that we've all been here. And I wanted to, dive into our deconstructed for today, which I believe very relevant, but a little lighthearted, but also very relevant, right?
Yeah.
Because we can
one of our favorite movies.
And it's one of so many people's favorite movies. If it's not on the top
I know.
5, at least top 10 of your comedies,
classic.
So we're talking about Coming to America, Eddie Murphy's Coming to America. And, story of this prince from, Zamunda, and he's talking about coming to America to find his queen. And, he goes to Queens, New York, and, just comedy ensues. But the way we are, presenting it today goes back to that conversation that we were having earlier about how, African immigrants can feel, as well as how African Americans can feel about Africa based on our lack of education of it, and how media plays a part in it. And this movie really, even though it is, it speaks to a lot of those points, a lot of people took the movie at surface level and then started to reverberate or reiterate the points of contention that exists in the movie. So you go ahead, and I'll do another deep dive.
Let me see. So what would I bring up about the movie? I mean, it's one of my favorites. I think it's hilarious. First and foremost, it's a hilarious movie. But I think it was funny. One of the standout things, I guess, after watching the movies, watching the movie over and over and over, I can quote that movie word for word. But it's just crazy thinking how outside of the movie, outside of the Hollywood production, a lot of people, like, that was our idea or our first, like, our introduction to Africa. For a lot of people, like, our idea, like, what is it? And it wasn't even a real African country, But I think that, I don't know, that part was it's just kind of crazy to me. Like, and then his idea, like, well, what do I find a queen? Let's go to Queens. It's just a hilarious movie. But I don't know. I don't know. What did you like? What stood out to you about the movie? Like, what are you gonna deconstruct about it?
So you brought up the point that Zamunda is not a country, right? It's not a real country.
Yeah.
But a lot of people did, right?
Right.
Like, literally,
Right.
Zamunda was not a country that exists. It's just like what we said yesterday is, all you got to do is go look at the map. I was just fascinated with the map of Africa, so I knew a lot more than so many people. So
right.
A lot of people don't care about geography in the country that they live in.
Right, period.
But I wanted to talk about so Akeem comes over, right, and he starts to work at McDowell's. And when he gets hired, first of all, when John Amos's character, Mr. McDowell, sees Akeem and what was Arsenio Hall's character's name? Dang, it was something like Femi or Remy.
Remy or Timmy? Was it Remy?
Man,
yeah, it was like Remy.
I can't remember. Y'all tell us
now
in the comments.
You say that, I can't think of it. But yeah, I think Remy. I think Remy. Yeah. And, right. Tell me who is. I think it was Remy. I'm hearing Remy.
It's something that rhymes with that. If it's not that exactly,
right?
But they go in. We know beforehand that, first of all, Akeem is a prince, very well educated, and so is Arsenio Hall's character, right? So, but when they go to the job interview, they are talking down to them as if they don't even know how to hold a mop, right?
Right.
And they just assume that because they come from Africa, they don't know anything, or they have a lack of, access to knowledge. And that goes back to the discussion we were having about when you go to Africa, assuming that you're going to bring all of the education to them, right? And coming in there, even as an expat, when you as an American or someone from the diaspora go to Africa, like, you come in with that, I'm going to save this place attitude. And what that does is demean them, and you're already putting yourself at an elevated point. And so the attitude when they first meet them is that, oh, they come from Africa, they don't know anything. Already, kind of reestablishing the thought that everything in Africa is bush. There's no development. There's no, culture. There's no access to real knowledge, or knowledge that I value as an American educated person, right?
Yeah.
And so you see that presented in just the interactions, the way that even the daughter that ended up, being the love interest, the way she looked at Akeem in their first interactions, in their first conversations. She wasn't not only looking at him as an option, as a love interest, she didn't consider him as a person almost, right? The way that she kind of talked down to him and patted him on the head and certain things like that was very, what's the word I'm looking for? It was demeaning, right? And so they go to the basketball game, and then they see like how the guy who notices Akeem as Prince of Zamunda is like all on him, and even like how the boyfriend Soul Glow, right?
Oh, yeah.
The way Soul Glow treated Akeem was so dismissive, almost to the point of like, you don't matter. And it wasn't until the James Earl Jones, the king, that everybody's attitude changes. Oh, they're
Yeah.
royalty. Oh, they're rich. Oh, we can benefit from them. Now I'm treating them in a certain way. And then, even at that point, James Earl Jones had to check John Amos for, speaking about them, speaking to them in a certain way. And then what's funny is then John Amos in his own house gets disrespected because the king comes over with the royalty and is starting to look down on them, thinking that as a Black American, he's uneducated. So we see both sides of that conflict of just what we were talking about earlier today, as well as yesterday, where Africans' lack of knowledge about our education and what they see about us in the media as being ultra violent, and that narrative, them buying into that, can be insulting to us, and it can turn into them coming over here with preconceived notions about us and being insulting. And so it's on both sides. There is guilt and really blame to go around for everybody, which is why the conversation, the dialogue, not the talking at, but the talking to, is very important. And to be open and even, the king of Zamunda was wrong when he comes into John Amos's house and disrespects this man in his own house. Not only disrespects him, but also disrespects his daughter, saying, alluding to that Akeem doesn't really want his daughter, doesn't really consider her as a viable, queen,
right?
That he's just using her to sow his royal oats, right? So disrespecting her and her ability to be recognized as royalty, a queen, or even somebody that can be considered to be a part of their family. So you see it happening on both sides. You see how John Amos and his family and the Americans treated Akeem when they thought he was nobody, right? Then you see the reverse happen when the king of Zamunda comes and disrespects a man in his own house, doesn't respect the empire that John Amos has built as an African American, that has not only a successful restaurant, but has, a franchise that is, I don't know if it was comparable to McDonald's in the world of Coming to America, but it was very successful, right? And it's not hard. It's not an easy accomplishment for a Black man in those in this environment. So just that presentation in a comedy, right? So in our Deconstructed, our whole thing is to break down movies in a way that you weren't thinking about, because my brain works
hadn't
a certain
even thought
way.
about I hadn't even thought about that part of, like, he's the kingdom, right? I mean, he has his kingdom right here. He's doing extremely well.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Compared to most people in his, in his area, and then you got royalty over there. Yeah, that's a good point to even bring up. I didn't even think about that specific part.
People be asking me, bro, how do you even enjoy movies?
I'll be the same way though. I just be like, man, you can't watch something like just passively anymore. You just gotta break it down.
Right. I can't. My brain doesn't work that way where I could just passively watch something. I still enjoy the comedy. I'm still laughing at all the jokes, but I see every element in it, and I can see how, because we as Black people watching Coming to America, like you said, being one of our first introductions to Africa, right? We are looking at this, and that's our presentation to that world. And even though, some of us find out that Zamunda isn't a real country, the reason that it's so funny is because it really works like that. Sometimes the funniest things are the things that mirror the truth. The way we really see, the way we really interact with one another, right? So it's very important to acknowledge those things as what they are, And it's important for us to be able to laugh at it, but it's also important for us to talk about it and really deconstruct these things in a way that we can really come to the table and say, okay, I see my part in what I played and how I'm accountable to furthering this misunderstanding and these divisive myths that we hold about. I see my accountability as a continental African. I see mine as an African American or someone in the diaspora. And, it's just important to not only see that, but to also frame it in a way, which is why we do construct it after we do the highlight reel, after we do Morning Quarterback, after we do the Straight Truth No Chaser. And we try to make this show as thematic as possible, where every segment kind of bleeds into thematically some type of string into the previous ones, because now that you know the long history of our embracing of Africa and that aesthetic, and then the embracing of Africans in the diaspora from people actually on the continent, now that you know that Pan-Africanism isn't just a theory. And so when we challenge our faults in it, we can challenge them also knowing that there is a history and a persistence of those ideas being challenged themselves, right? So you don't look at it and just be sad at the reality. You're like, oh my God, I'm so sad that we, did this to one another. But you can also revel in the fact that we have also been fighting to counterbalance that narrative the entire time, right? And so to elevate them both, and when we bring up the critiques, that the critique is coming out of love, because we've already shown that, first of all, we validated your feelings, right? As an African immigrant or as somebody who's still living on the continent of Africa, who had negative experiences with people in the diaspora, we validate your experience. We don't share and say, get over it, right? Also, we validate your experience as an African in the diaspora who experienced, the same thing from continental Africans. And then we validate the experience of us actually having been working for that for the length of time that we have been, and that we can re-embrace that social activism playbook, right? So we're taking the plays from what has already been developed, and we are implementing them and saying that the wheel doesn't need to be reinvented. The acronym ASAP can still just be the original acronym ASAP. We need to accomplish these things as soon as possible. We don't have any time to waste. And so, that's why I'm on, coming to a. So now that I've presented to you my deconstructed, so what are your follow-up thoughts?
Now you pretty much then defined it for me, because that was the one thing I think that stood out was just the lack of knowledge of the condescending ideas about that people had of one another in that movie. And it was just like, I don't know. I did enjoy that one more, as a comedy, but thinking about all of those different, aspects of it. Now I'm thinking about that movie, just more critically now. So you pretty much broke that down for me. I didn't even think about that whole aspect of, like, it's a kingdom on both sides, But yeah, I mean, shoot, that's now it's something else to think about.
Even Soul Glow had a kingdom. Like, that was an empire that they built, like, of that hair company, right?
Right, like, you doing your thing. You out here, you got your stuff established. Because he is hot stuff. He got people over his house.
Right.
He is the king, of his kingdom. So, man, I'm ready for that new one to come out, though.
Yeah, me too. I hope it's good. I keep my fingers crossed.
I know,
but right. Coming to America was deeper than sexual chocolate, but sexual chocolate. So we can still enjoy the comedy in it as well, right? And so we're gonna move on into our for the culture, and we're gonna watch a short little video. We're gonna try this again. We're gonna keep pushing this technology until it works right. So y'all just bear with us and just watch this video and tell us what y'all think, right?
All right, it's planned. There we go.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. How do Senegalese really feel about slavery and what happened? Because, you know, there were a lot of very foul people involved in the slave trade. There was, of course, Europeans, you know, Jews and whites were involved, but, you know, Africans were involved in it as well. They were selling off their enemies, you know, the enemy tribes and making their money and so forth. Like, how was slavery really looked at out there?
Well, in Senegal, we've kind of overcome the thought of slavery. We don't even think about it. The only time we think about it, honestly, is when we're doing tours at Go to Island. You know, outside of that, people have lived and moved and way beyond the slavery concept and idea and mind state.
Right, because in Senegal, you actually know your history. You can trace your family back 100 generations, whatever else. You still have your names, your real names. You're not named Johnson,
and Jackson,
and Washington, Luther, and all the other slave owners that were the presidents who had slaves during that time, Jefferson,
you know,
and so forth. Yeah, but you guys actually have your history, and that was the whole thing of walking around Senegal. People just felt, this was the first time I felt Black people just felt comfortable, and with no type of disease. You know, I mean,
I think it's also the art of just letting the past go. And moving towards the future. And I think in the US, they have the stigma of just not letting go of the past and blaming the past on every mishap or, you know, disappointment. And I think as long as you hold on to that past, it's just a lot of weight that you carry with you everywhere you go. And it's hard to move forward, move fast when you got to, you know, weight on your back. You just got to let it go.
There's also been no reparations. And there's been, you know.
Yeah, but unfortunately, man, like, it's not like America is going to take the initiative to do it. I mean, otherwise they would have did it already. You know, Indians got reparations, the Jewish got reparations for Holocaust, and it was in America.
That's true.
You know what I'm saying?
Italians got reparations.
Italians got reparations. I mean, Japanese got reparations.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, it's to the point now where African Americans have to really understand their worth and realize that America was never or intended to ever, you know, consult or even make up for any of that. They're not sorry. They don't care. It's so. Do you want to continue to be treated way back home, where no longer the minority? You actually are the majority, and you control your destiny and your future and your land.
Yeah. No. Honestly, every Black person who has an issue with how people are treated in America, they really should go to Africa.
They need to. They just need to go.
99% of them have not.
I've never been there.
Yeah.
And they're super afraid to go.
Like, a few of my friends, you know, the whites have gone back, and you know, the Johnson.
So we got the gist of that, right?
Right. We got the gist of that conversation. That's good enough.
To start acting.
Right.
I think we got of what Akon was saying, right?
Yeah, we got that. We got that much.
What you just say? I didn't hear you.
Okay, now I hear you again. You there with me? You hear me?
Can you hear me?
Okay, I hear you now. All right. Yeah, we got the gist of that conversation.
So okay. So what were your thoughts?
I think on that video, I don't know. Okay. You hear me? You here with me? You here with me?
I got you.
Okay. All right. But yeah, on that video, I do agree with most of what Akon was saying. And I mean, honestly, I don't have much of a problem with anything that he said. I think I shared this conversation or this clip in an article that was written on it with some friends, you know, just to see what people thought about it as well. And I think the most offensive thing that people took was just the idea of getting over slavery. And I didn't take Akon as saying that, that we need to forget it, or like, like it doesn't matter, it happened and get over it, move on. But more so like what he said further into the conversation is like, it's a weight on you. You know what I mean? Like, are we able to operate without being, feeling like weighed down by the devastating, just the fact that this did happen? Can we move forward? Because that's, ultimately what we're working towards is to improve our situation, right? And so if we keep leaning on just you can, if you're just leaning on like just what happened and not really moving forward, I mean that, it's just hindering you. And I think what he said about about Black people moving to Africa or just visiting. You don't even have to move to Africa, but just visiting, or being in an environment where you are a part of the majority. You're no longer a minority. That's one of my experiences, and one of the most valuable things I felt, I learned from of living on the continent is, in certain places, is not feeling singled out. Now, of course, being, I don't know how people can tell that I'm American. I mean, sometimes I guess I could stand out with my tattoos or my hairstyle or something, but I felt it was the first time, honestly, actually, when I went to HBCU, it was the first time I didn't feel that weight of just being the number. I had kind of like that anxiety of, will I just be a number? Because I heard all these things of going to college and, you'll be stressed out and singled out, and I don't want to have to speak for myself, speak for my whole group of people. So I felt that my experience at HBCU alone gave me that feeling, and that also encouraged me to want to move to an African country to also feel that. And I think that experience is valuable, and I think that's pretty much what he was saying is like being amongst ourselves. So because it's a lot of stress on you when you're being discriminated against because you're a minority, and I think that's something that we can learn from it. What did you take out? What was the most, what stood out to you about that conversation, about what his statement?
So, like we talked about earlier, and nuance, right? So there's a nuanced view of what Akon is talking about. So we know that Akon is from Senegal, right? And he has experience living both in Senegal as well as in the United States. So when he says he feels that we focus, he said one line in there is that I feel like Black Americans focus a little bit too much on the past. And sometimes I can understand that. We don't need to be, like I always say, we don't need to be addicted to the struggle so much so that we're not solution oriented.
Yep.
But I feel like sometimes we don't know enough about the past. We have not learned enough about our history and the things that we have done to make sure that we are embracing Sankofa so that we can look back to go forward. A lot of people, like we talked about with Black Wall Street, have purposefully not told their children and grandchildren of the realities that they faced, trying to shield them from that trauma. And that does a disservice to that generation. So sometimes it's not so much, that we need to stop looking back, that we need to look back, but look back purposefully, look back intentionally at certain elements to know what has happened, to know how these things happen. So I disagree with the element of that we focus too much on the past. I think a lot of us who are struggling don't know enough of not only what happened to us, but what we have done and what we accomplished. A lot of people don't know enough about Seneca Village, right? Which was another version of a Black Wall Street type successful community that a lot of people don't know this, that Central Park that is in New York today was Seneca Village. It was a fully Black owned residential and business viable community. And what happened?
Yep.
It was torn down so that people would have a place in the middle of Manhattan to walk their dogs and take a dog. They tore down people's homes and businesses for that reason. Not knowing that we accomplished that can detrimentally harm our ability to see our own self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is different from self-esteem. Self-esteem is how you feel about yourself. Self-efficacy is how you feel about what you can accomplish. Feeling that you are actually worthy to chase your dream because you feel like you have the ability to do it.
Yep.
So not knowing enough about the accomplishments of our ancestors, especially in the midst of the belly of the beast of a society that we are the physical and numerical minority, and still found a way to overcome all of those barriers and find success. The fact that we don't know that we did these things can also be a detriment to our advancement. I do agree with the point that expecting reparations from America is like expecting the person who shot you on purpose to call the ambulance for you, right?
Exactly.
That is not going to happen. It doesn't mean that you don't want justice to be served. It doesn't mean reparations aren't owed. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that our expectation on it coming from them and even being, of value of what was actually taken should not be our expectation fully. We should still demand it. We should still have it on our Black agenda, but we should also be implementing ways that we can create our own economic viability afterwards. I was having a conversation with my wife, who is free, and I was letting her know that people like to compare enslavement and our ma'afa, our trauma, to the Holocaust. Well, after the Holocaust ended, there was no Jim Crow. There was no Black Code. There was no lynching that proceeded in the aftermath of the Holocaust. So when we talk about reparations being owed, it's not just, okay, the Emancipation Proclamation came and went and Black people have been on equal footing since. You know what I mean? We came up out of enslavement and still built viable communities. And those communities were torn down. And in the midst of being economically successful, that's why the lynching started, because they were jealous of our economic prowess, of our advancement in education, of all of the successes we were doing. So we didn't just suffer from being enslaved and build a country on our backs. We suffered more so in the aftermath of enslavement, because while we were so-called there, we had valued white people that they even, protected the lives of the property. When we were free and able to compete with them, we showed ourselves intelligent. We showed ourselves worthy, so much so that not only did we compete with them, we surpassed them in a lot of instances. And that's where we came into a lot of the horrific things that happened to us in the aftermath of that. So when you say don't focus on the past or kind of allude to get over it, we have to be careful with those type of sentiments. And it's kind of easier to say from a perspective of someone who does have their culture intact and trace it directly and doesn't understand all of the trauma that, that has come as a part of that.
Yeah. So that's the thing. So I like 100%, we already agree on that and zeroing in on the history. And that's why when I think of us being solution oriented, when we really want to we really have to get to the root of the problem. So that means investigating more. And that's why we do what we do when we try to, have our people become more informed on our history so that we know for one, not to repeat some of the same things, not to fall into the same traps. And we have to know, we have to be empowered. You know what I mean? We have to be inspired by people who have done it. When we talk about like a Garvey and and who everyone else who, came before and after, we can get the inspiration from them and know that we have the potential to build again. And that's the thing also within this conversation of, especially when we talk about Black African people in the diaspora moving back to the continent. A lot of the time, we have there's a lot of us don't want to go back. A lot of us can't go back, and I think within that conversation, there's like, you have to ask like, well, where is home? Because a lot of us feel that, well, we built America, we built this and that, and so I feel though, I don't feel that since our ancestors helped to build that place up and build the economy, that I have to stay there. I actually feel that I will be better off somewhere else, because I don't want to be amongst the people who, you know what I mean, and in that system, unless we can transform, unless there will be a complete tearing down and rebuilding of the entire system. That's how I personally feel on that. But just being inspired by our ancestors who have put in that work and rebuilt straight out of enslavement. They rebuilt towns. They were, like you said, very progressive. They built factories and, schools, all these different institutions and businesses, and we're doing for themselves. We can take that knowledge and understand that wherever we go, we can also build that again. We can take that same knowledge, that same determination, and we can build another home elsewhere. So that's how I feel on that. But I think, like I said, it's going to be multiple layers to, and it's not going to be like you said, not a getting over it, because it's there, is relevant, but we need to know, like, it's a whole process of getting through it, of working through it.
Also, I want to say that, on the part where he ended saying that, everybody needs Africa, right? And a lot of people are afraid. That part is true because of what we have been presented, and we just talked about it, and the ways that we're even some of the ideas and action presented even in Coming to America, right? The aesthetic was presented to us, and also not seeing African societies in their fullness represented, not in our formal education, in our media, in informal education, in anything, right? So I get that. But then there are those of us, like myself, I've been to Africa since I was about 6-7 years old. However, I come from the projects. I don't come from money. Right. And he and like Vlad and Pecan, they were naming off celebrities. We're going, I couldn't just get up and go. I've been literally trying to go to Africa since, like, seriously trying to go since 2007. The first time I stepped foot in Africa was December 4th, 2013. Right. Yeah. And it took me that long, the opportunity. You and I were supposed to go to Africa for the first time together. We both got accepted into that Tanzania program, but my funds got tied up into something else and I couldn't go. And it was just the reality of my situation at that time. I had the desire to go. And there was an episode of Atlanta, Donald Glover's show, and they had an episode about Juneteenth. And it was this Black woman who had married this white guy, and this white guy had all this African in his office and was like doing the Kwanzaa chants and saying Harambe and all this stuff. And he was telling, Donald Glover, have you not been to Africa? And he was like, no. And he was like, wow, this is wonderful. He was like, everybody, doesn't have the means or the time or the ability to go and be able to embrace that. Not that it's not desired, not that, it's not on our minds, but to just, sometimes we speak out of our own privilege, not acknowledging where everybody else is. That's why even when I talk, we like even in our education, like you and I studied African American studies, so we got access to a lot of knowledge. And what can happen when you're insulated in a group of people who are learning at the same time as you, and you are with an inner circle who knows what you know, you start to assume that your inner circle is to be generalized with everybody else, and it's not true. What a lot of people don't know the information, and when you assume that they do and find out that they don't, and you come off as so shocked, it comes off as arrogant. It comes off as demeaning. It comes off as, oh my God, you don't know this? How could you not know this? This is information. But because you've been so insulated in your own bubble, in your own world, that you don't realize that everybody didn't take that voyage with you. And from my perspective, I've always looked at, okay, I'm from Carver Homes. I know how I grew up, and I carry that with me everywhere I go, so much so that when I gain new information, I don't say they know it with me. It's my responsibility as somebody from there to take it back to my people, and not take it back in like so much so as to water it down, but to make it palatable for the people who haven't been scholastic. I'm not going to say it like I'm writing a research paper. I'm going to present it in a way, which is why ASAP is presented. We use sports references. We use references from the media. We talk like regular people. I have my academic voice on when I'm on this platform on purpose, so that you know that, oh, cuz is from Atlanta. Like he got his accent. He's talking intelligently but still colloquial. You know what I mean? I'm speaking clear, but I'm not going out of my way to use, terms to make myself seem superior to anybody else. I'm talking the way I would talk to anybody that I meet on the street or whatever. So there's a way to carry on that information, and also to check your privilege. Like a lot of times, like we talk about white privilege, right? But there's all types of privileges. There is Black female privilege, where sometimes in the white supremacist society, they will elevate opportunities for Black women so as to demean Black men, to devalue us in the workplace, so that we can't feel like we bring value and access of financial things to our family, so as to keep a welfare society of dependency there. Those are Black female privileges. There is Black male privilege on just our way as men. We get to move around, and certain expectations aren't on us that are on Black women. There is continental African privilege of knowing your language and knowing where you come from, that we in the diaspora are longing. There is Black diaspora privilege. There's Black American privilege of having access to the things and the amenities that come from America. So checking our own privilege, the privilege that comes from the education that we've gained, everybody checks it in turn, so that when we are in conversation with one another, we come to bearing everything, saying, okay, I realize that I have this, and also checking your privilege in a way to utilize it for the benefit of other people. As a Black man, I can enter in spaces that Black women would be looked at upon as such and such. So if Black women want to accomplish something that they know that they can't move as easy in that realm, Black men should stand in the forefront to move in that realm, not on behalf of them selfishly, but on the behalf to advance the goals and the agenda of Black women. If they feel like they can't, if they need our assistance, we all need one another, and there are certain things and elements that we have access to. The same thing with that concept of being a team and being on one another. You have certain strengths, and with those strengths come also privileges that the greater society has created, and working within the confines of that, acknowledging that they exist, and then utilizing them to our benefit. The same thing when we talk to our white allies. our white ally can use that white privilege to get into spaces and create conversations where, as a Black person, I can't get in that environment to have that conversation. But if you are an ally, you can take what I'm saying and reiterate it to the people who I need to get that information to.
For sure,
right?
for
And
sure.
So it all plays into that realm. So it's just, we have to be careful and intentional about the words that we use, about the phrases, about how we present certain information. So, just to go back over the point, I agree with elements of what Akon is saying, and there are elements there should be a nuanced dialogue about. And nuance, having that subtle distinguishing factor, and being able to agree and also understand where a person is coming from, and then being able to listen, digest it, get the nourishment from it, and then respond, right? And so just like we always say, this conversation, the way that we present it, is to model healthy conversations. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's what I was well, my perspective, I'll say this, my perspective on that is, like, for me, for someone like me who, like, with the mind that I have, or like my interests, I feel like, okay, I hear everything that you said and I agree, like, on how to, how we need to be able to communicate with each other to make it digestible for other people to receive. I'm a person where I can chew on a clove of garlic, you know what I mean, to just knock out this cold. I don't need that sugary layer, to take my medicine. And so for me, I can receive, like, what Akon said, because I know his intentions. I know what he's doing. I know the work that he's doing and what he meant by that. I know that he didn't mean it, but it was his privilege of knowing his culture, or knowing, of being able to say, well, it's easy, just do it. You know what I mean? It could be the privilege of him having money to be able to travel freely. You know what I mean? But for someone who, I feel like what my duty would be, is to take that information or inspiration from it, and be able to translate that to, like you said, be able to translate it to people, meet them where they are. Everyone won't see, well, how is it that easy? Some people will be offended at the door, like, well, you just said it like it's just so easy, like I could just pick up and do it. I'm not rich, you know what I mean? I find a way, and I love to travel the world. I find a way to do it. I don't come from money, you know what I mean? And so what I can do when I have friends who reach out to me, or I want to give somebody some advice, or, how do you do this? How do you get here and do that? I can teach them, I can tell them a way to where they're like not overwhelmed, but like, well, how do I just do it? Like we can, that's the part about communication, is like, we have to meet people where they are. And also, I think it's important for us, because everybody won't be ready to receive, well, go, you can go back to Africa, you can be a part of the majority, and you don't have to worry about being a minority there, because that's good information that he was given. It was actually good information. It was actually, something that we can use, something we can learn from. But it was, like you said, it was like a part of the privilege, of knowing, of just going, being able to, that people got offended with. And so I think, for some of us, we could also understand in this exchange, like, we have to compromise in this exchange, is sometimes not be so offended, don't stop and try to cancel somebody because you're offended by what you think they meant by, or what they said. But maybe it'll take somebody else translating it a different way, in a different language, meeting you where you are, making it more, understandable, or more possible, for you to understand. And I think, so I will bring down that, like, of being extra sensitive,
Also,
of every messenger. Yeah, I'll say.
We know that people read headlines and people retweet blindly, right? And people will share a post blindly,
clickbait,
and without ever reading it. And so they'll see Akon said this and not really look at the video. And the video was only 3 minutes, right?
Yeah.
And it was just a clip. And pretty much everything that he was saying that people are upset about is in that 1 3-minute clip. And it's a longer, like hour-long whole interview, right? So it's very important for us to learn how to not just clickbait decisions based on headlines.
Yeah.
Read the entire article, like we said before. Watch the entire 3-minute video clip. It's not that difficult.
Yeah.
And see,
Right.
like you said, you know of the work that Akon is actually doing. So they just looking at the surface. Oh, Akon, the convict music founder, and in Africa, what he has been doing to provide in the diaspora. And so very important to know that, as well as and I wanted to say one last thing before we close out. So no canceling of Akon, right? We don't do cancel culture. We don't promote that. We say counsel culture, not cancel culture. Anyway, I wanted to address the part about visiting Africa and moving. I do believe that it is very important for every person of African descent to at least go to Africa and be there, like I said, not as a resort, be there for at least an amount of time where you're not so much so on an itinerary and you're always looking at, oh man, my flight is coming up. Be able to be there in a way that you can wake up like for a week and just live the experience, right? And which means you have to be there for more than a week. And I, through African Unity Initiative, am starting to create a program where we are creating tours that give that experience. And there are so many other people who have tours. Do you see that? Oh man, he's talking about other people having tours when he's about to start tours. It's not competition. Everybody's not going to be able to make my tour. Everybody's not going to be able to make Prince Dynast Amir's tour to Africa. Everybody's not going to be able to make Habasha's tour. Yeah, I call them out by name because I want you to go look up Habasha when they do the Black to Africa. I want you to go look up Prince Dynast Amir when he does his trips to Africa.
And
join those tours. Go on everybody's tour. Everybody isn't going to be able to make them. When African Unity, when we present our We Are One tours, come to our tours. I don't see it as a competition. I just want the results.
Get there. Just get there.
I want people to get there. I want you to have access to it. And we are very considerate of people who are financially strapped, right? And I also identify my freedom to move in the way that I want to, because at the time that I was traveling, I didn't have children. I understand that my brother had children before I did, and so he couldn't have that travel bubble that I had. I had a bubble where I had the freedom to go to Peace Corps and just leave everything in my life behind and not even think twice about it, right? I didn't have a home that I was tied to. I didn't have a lease that I was tied to. A lot of these things make that reality difficult. So I'm trying to make that bubble palatable for people. Every Black student doesn't have access to study abroad. It's a lot of universities that don't even offer study abroad to Black students and the opportunity to travel. So a lot of these things, I consider those things when I'm talking to people. And also on the point of moving to Africa, I completely understand. You know me, I'd rather be in Africa any day. But I also believe that wherever African people are is Africa. I believe in the concept. That's one of my things that I believe about the African diaspora, that we created a new Africa in Haiti. We created a new Africa in Jamaica. We created a new Africa in Brazil. We embraced that culture. We did the same thing here in the United States. So those of us who feel that sentiment of my ancestors had a significant portion of building this, I'm not just going to let their work be consumed and all of the advances of this land be taken over by the people who oppressed and enslaved us. I understand that sentiment too. When I look at the route, and I'll pull up a picture of it on our next episode, when I look at the route of the transatlantic slave trade, I don't see it as the creation of the diaspora. I see those routes as a bridge. I see that as the expansion of Africa. They say the sun never set on the Spanish Empire because they colonized half the world. The sun really never set on on the continent of Africa, because we are everywhere. We are global,
everywhere.
and I want us to be Pan-African, whether you live on the continent or whether you stay exactly where you are, embracing the mentality. Like yesterday, we talked about neo-colonialism and not tearing down the person in power, but tearing down the structure, the power structure.
Yeah.
Like, we don't always have to physically be in Africa, but we can up the power structure of having the mentality of being African where we are. And that is the important part. And so I want to make sure that we leave this conversation. We are modeling a conversation of how to speak to one another. It's not competitive, but cooperative. It is not argumentative, but conversational. It's not aggressive, but compassionate. Not cancel culture, but counsel culture, right? And so we hope that you carry on these conversations, you research our highlight reel, you consider what we talked about in the Monday morning quarterback, and you think about these things in your own life. Pull out your Googles, do your research. Don't just take our words for it. And, you know, be critical of the media that you consume. Like Coming to America, very, very funny movie, but there are things and elements in it that can be considered in other ways. So I love you all. Michelee, let people where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me at Michie the Maker on social media and mishmashworld.com, my website. But again, like, you know, just touching on what you said, I think, you know, this dialogue is the ongoing dialogue that's going to be, you know, just important for us to continue with each other. We don't cancel each other. We don't get just frustrated with, you know, well, this is how they are and this is how we are. And we want to build those bridges and really, you know, rebuild those connections. Like you said, we are Africa. Wherever we are, it's like it's in us. It's in our blood. We are the seeds, you know, and so we have to improve these relationships with wherever we are, wherever we want to settle, wherever you choose to be, you know, we can, but we need that unity, you know. So yeah, I'll close out with that. That's
right. And I appreciate it. And as always, we end the show with actual African unity. If you want to be involved in African Unity Initiative and what we're doing, please check out our website, www.africanunity.us, to get involved, become a member, you know, contribute financially, contribute with your time, contribute with, you know, your other resources and access to things. And also, you know, subscribe, like, share, comment to our YouTube page, to our other podcasts and videos. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook at African Unity. And, you know, as always, we will see you next week. We will see you guys on Tuesday. And thank you all for joining us and being part of these discussions. Next week is going to be very lively because we're going to deep dive into the male-female relationships in the Black community and how we relate to one another. And there's such a deep dive to go into that. So again, we love you guys. As always, you know,
be safe.
Peace.